Hi, I'm Ivan. I'm a software engineer at Parabeac, and today I'll be showing you how to install, configure, and run ParabeCore on your Windows machine. Because ParabeCore does not have native support for Windows, we have to install ParabeCore using the Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL, which I'll be teaching you how to set up in the next step. So let's get started. The first step we need to take in order to install ParabeCore on our Windows machine is to install the WSL. Now, as you can see, I've pulled up the official Microsoft documentation for how to do that, and we essentially have two options, which are the simplified install or the manual install. For this tutorial, I'll be going over the manual install just because it's a lot more accessible. And before we actually begin the tutorial, I highly recommend that you open up a PowerShell terminal and type the following command: systeminfo type find quote system type end quote. We'll see here in my case it says that I have an x64 based PC. Now this will be helpful because later on it'll give us different instructions for different architectures. So depending on your machine, you may have to follow different directions. In my case, I have an x64, so I'll be following the steps for that. So make sure that you run this command and you know what kind of architecture your system has. So I'll go ahead and scroll down into the manual installation steps. And the first step is to enable the Windows Subsystem for Linux. And the first thing we need to do for that is to copy this command, open our PowerShell as administrator, paste the command, and press enter. We can see here that the features have been enabled and the operation was completed successfully. And here we can see that they recommend installing or updating to WSL2, but if you only want WSL1 or you can't update to WSL2, then you can go ahead to skip to the section where we install the Linux distribution. For now, let's move on to step 2, check requirements for running WSL2. And here's where knowing what kind of architecture our system has will be useful. So for x64 systems, we have certain requirements, and for ARM64 systems, we have certain other requirements. One thing to note is that you have to be running Windows 10, otherwise you cannot update to WSL2. So as the tutorial says, I'll go ahead and press Windows logo key and the R, type in WinVer, press enter, and here I can see I'm running version 2004 with OS build 19041. And if I compare that to the x64 system, I can see that I meet the requirements, so that means I'm good to go for the next step. Step 3, and we have to enable the virtual machine feature. If you've never done virtualization on your machine, then I highly recommend that you go on this tutorial and click the virtualization capabilities link. This may require for you to go to your BIOS options for your computer and enable some virtualizations options there. So once again, if you've never done virtualization before, I highly encourage you to look into that. So I'll go ahead and copy this command since I've already enabled it, open our PowerShell and paste that command. Press enter, and the operation was completed successfully. So the next step, it says right here, is to restart our machine and complete the WSL and update to WSL2. However, before we actually reboot our machine, I recommend that you run the following command, bcd edit, and make sure that you see hypervisor launch type and that it's set to auto. If this is not set to auto, this might bring you some issues when running the WSL and the Linux distribution. So if it's set to something other than auto, then I recommend that you run the following command, bcd edit /set hypervisor launch type auto and hit enter. We can see that the operation completed successfully, and now we're ready to reboot our system and move on to the next steps. So now that we've rebooted our system, we're ready to go on to step 4, which is downloading the Linux kernel update package. In order to do that, the step 1 is to download the latest package, which you will get from this link. So go ahead and press it and save it. Make sure you read the notes. If you're using an ARM64 machine, download the ARM64 package instead. Since I don't have an ARM64 package, I'll be downloading the x64 one. And I can just go ahead and run the package. Click on Finish. And that's pretty much it. So once the installation is complete, I can move on to the next step, setting up WSL2 as our default version. So let's go ahead and do that. And step 5, it's pretty simple. So all I have to do is copy this command, open our PowerShell in Administrator, and paste the command. So you can see that the command was successful, and it says for more information on key differences with WSL2, visit the following link. So I'll go ahead and minimize this. And the next step, now that we've set up our WSL2 version, is to install the Linux distribution of choice. Now here we have a lot of choices. You can see here we have Ubuntu, Kali Linux, Debian. So if you have a preference, go ahead and download that preference. If you don't, I highly recommend getting the Ubuntu just because it's beginner friendly. So I'll click on the Ubuntu link, click on Get, open Microsoft Store, click Install, and you can see right here it's downloading. It'll take a few moments, and once it is installed, I can press Launch. So it says installing. This may take a few minutes. You can see that we've done all these steps, and now I have to enter a new Unix username. For now, I'll just name my username Tour. And your password, I'll go ahead and set those. And we can see that everything was initialized properly. So now we have our Ubuntu running on our Linux, and we're ready to go ahead and actually install ParabeCore. So we've just installed our WSL for our Windows machine, and we're ready to install ParabeCore on this terminal. So I've actually gone ahead and in the WSL, I installed Dart and Flutter because that process takes a little bit more time, so I will not be covering that in this tutorial. So the first thing we need to do is go into the ParabeCore GitHub repository, and in here you'll see a green button that says Code. Click on it, and here there are several ways that we can clone the ParabeCore repository. Probably the easiest way is to copy this link right here. So I'll go ahead and click on this clipboard icon and open up my Ubuntu terminal, and then type git clone and paste the link there. Press enter, and we can see that it's cloning into ParabeCore, and this will take probably just a couple of minutes to clone. Okay, so we can see that the cloning was successful, so go ahead and cd into ParabeCore. If you do an ls, you should see a file structure similar to this. Go ahead and type dart pub get, press enter, and we can see that the dependencies were solved properly and we got a bunch of dependencies. So this is pretty much all we need to set up to install ParabeCore in our WSL. And we're good to go to set up some of our design files and finally run ParabeCore. With the installation of ParabeCore now complete in our Linux environment, I can go ahead and show you how to set up a design file that interacts with ParabeCore and takes advantage of some of its features. So because we're running this on a Windows machine, it means that we do not have access to Sketch, which is macOS only. So I'll be demonstrating how to set up a Figma file for this step. and I'll be using the ParabeCore demo file as well, which you can access by going into the ParabeCore GitHub repository, scroll down into the README, click on Get Started in the table of contents, scroll down a bit until you see feel free to download one of our sample design files below. In here you'll see Figma, go ahead and click on that. And you'll see that the design file we've set up has some symbols as well as some index screens. And the first thing I'd like to go over is prototyping for Figma. And if you go on this bar to the right and click on prototype, you'll see that we have a bunch of blue arrows, and that's because we've already set up prototyping. So if you would like to add a prototyping link to any of your components for your design page, go ahead and click on the component that you want to take it to another page, and you'll see this blue button. If you click and drag, you'll see a blue arrow coming out, and now you see that when I get close to any of the screens, it kind of snaps to it. So if you let go, that means that when you click this Connect Facebook button, it will take you to the Community Groups page. And another thing I like to go over is the starting page. So if you click on Show Prototype Settings, you'll see here that we have this starting frame, and we see that we can select any of the frames. So I'll leave it at landing page. But essentially all that this does is that once we export the code from design to Flutter, it'll tell ParabeCore that we want to start our application in the landing page, and it'll automatically do that for us. Another thing that I'd like to note is ParabeCore support for eggs, which are essentially like plugins. They let you override some of ParabeCore's behavior and insert your own widgets and your own behavior to kind of personalize your output. So an example I can give you right here is in Learning Overview Alt, and in some of these other pages, we have a header navbar. Now the important part here is the navbar inside of the arrow brackets, because this tells ParabeCore that we want to export that component as a navbar. So if we go ahead and open this group, we see that we have some more arrow bracket notations. And here we're telling ParabeCore that we want the bell icon to be our leading widget. We want the user score group, which has text and an icon, that'll be our middle widget. And the profile icon will be our trailing widget. And then finally, we have our blue background. And so another example is down here, we have a tab bar. So you can see the arrow notations. If we go ahead and open the group, we see that we have a bunch of tabs that we want to give to that tab bar. So essentially, these are probably the widgets, the eggs that you'll be using the most because of their usefulness. Another thing that I can go over is ParabeCore support for state management. So if you want to add state management to your design file, what you can do is follow this naming convention. So as you can see, this component right here is named small major card default. So we have two components that are almost exactly the same, but this one, its name is small major card / default, and this one is a different state called small major card / loved. So the notation that you should follow is the name of the component and / and the name of the state. And with that, ParabeCore will automatically detect that, and depending on which state management configuration you choose, it'll generate the widgets accordingly. So now that we've learned a little bit of how to interact with ParabeCore via our design files, I can go ahead and show you how to set up your state management configuration inside ParabeCore. So I'll go ahead and open my terminal here. And one of the cool things about WSL is that you can open Visual Studio Code if you have that installed via the Ubuntu terminal. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can see here that it opened Visual Studio Code. If you go into lib, configurations, and configurations.json, we can see that we have a state management key right here. If you change this, you'll be able to change the state management configuration when your code is exported. So currently we have support for provider, we have support for riverpod, and we have support for block. So if you wanted to use any of these, you would go ahead and type the configuration in. So I'll be putting provider and just save the file and you're good to go. For this example though, I'll be leaving it as none. So now that we've learned how to set up our design files and how to change the state management configuration of ParabeCore, next I'll demonstrate how to actually run ParabeCore and show you the output. So before we can actually get to generating the Figma file using ParabeCore, we first have to generate a Figma API key. Now, in order to do that, we'll have to go to figma.com, then log into your account or create an account if you don't have one already. Go to the main menu, help an account, and account settings. Scroll down a bit until you see personal access tokens. And here you see that I've already generated a few API keys, but in your case, it might be empty. So in order to create a new token, click on this text field right here, and you can add a token description of your choice. I'll name mine tutorial and press enter. We can see here that the key has been printed along with a message that says copy this token. This is the only chance to do so. So once we close this pop-up or once we close the tab, the key will be lost. So I highly recommend that you copy this key and put it somewhere where it won't get lost. Otherwise, you'll have to revoke access to the key and generate a new one. So now that we have our key, let's go into our Ubuntu terminal. And if you ever want to know what kind of arguments ParabeCore takes, type dart parabeak.dart and press enter. Here we have a list of common commands along with their description. But in this case, I'll be walking you through the Figma command lines. So type in dart, parabeak.dart, and the first argument that we need to give it is -k. And this is our API key that we just generated. So go ahead and paste that here. The second argument is -f for Figma file ID. So in order to get the Figma file ID, go into the Figma file that you want to convert. And if you look at the URL here, you'll see figma.com, file, and a series of numbers and letters. This is our file ID. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste it into our terminal. Okay, there we go. So those are the only two arguments that we need to give ParabeCore in order to convert Figma. And I'll also give the optional parameter of -n, which is for name, and I'll name it Figma project. And secondly, I'll give it the -o, which is for where we want to export this project. And I'll actually export it in the Windows environment. That way it's easier to run the conversion. So I'll do that real quick. And I want to export it into documents. So I'll press enter, and we can see here that our ParabeCore is converting. We're getting some green messages, which means that some of our elements are being processed correctly, and now we just have to wait for the images. Okay, seems like that's done, and it seems like the whole conversion was successful. So we can go and actually open this in Visual Studio Code, so I'll do that. Figma project, press enter. And here we have Visual Studio Code. We see that we have main.dart. If you see some of these errors, don't get scared. It probably means that we need to get the packages. So you might see a similar message to this. Go ahead and click on Get Packages. Let's just wait for it to complete. And if you don't see a similar message, you can just type in your terminal Flutter packages get. In order to get rid of these errors, I can go ahead and reload the window. and we can see that that's a lot better. So now I can actually go into the debug menu and click on Run and Debug to run this conversion. So I'll bring up my Android emulator here, and this will probably take a few minutes. So let's just give it some time. And no, it seems like it was pretty quick. So we can see here that this is the landing page where we have the sign up and login button. Since we have prototyping set up, I can go ahead and click the login button, which will bring me to the home screen. So we can see there are a few alignment bugs as well as some visual bugs, but the team's always working on ironing out these bugs. And since we set up prototyping in the tab bar, we can go ahead and click on the buttons and move to a different page. So this is essentially all that you need to know to get started using Parabeac-Core. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comment section, or you can also join the Discord server to interact with the community. I hope this video has been helpful, and thanks for watching.